Hi, my name is Frank and welcome to my woodturning channel. This week we're going to turn a Christmas ornament, and this is a sea urchin Christmas ornament. The shell of the sea urchin is right here, and there's going to be a top and then a bottom finial part. So let's see how we make out with this project this week. These are the sputnik sea urchins that I like to use. They have a little bit thicker shell than a regular sea urchin. And you'll notice there's a big hole on one side and a little bit smaller hole on the other side. This is just a small jig that I use to make sure the holes in the sea urchin are round. It'll become more obvious when I use this on the lathe, how this works. I'm just going to use a Kutzall rotary burr just to take off any obvious big pieces that are in the shell, so it's approximately round. And then after that, I use the jig that I was talking about. It has sandpaper on a cone, and then I just spin it relatively slowly, and I bring the sea urchin up to it and just lightly press against it until it makes a nice round tapered circle or hole in the sea urchin. In the situation where there's just a very small hole, I'll just use this larger Kutzall tapered burr and use that to sort of round out the hole. Because the sea urchins are a bit fragile, I'll use this Mod Podge, or you can use white glue on the inside just to harden it up and stiffen up the sea urchin so it doesn't fall apart or break as easily. Now I'm just cutting some blanks for the finials, the top finial and the bottom finial, and I'm just going to use fairly straight grained hard maple. Now I've got everything laid out I need for the project. I've got the finials, top and bottom. I've got a little drill and some dowels, which I'll show you where I use the dowels. And these are the main tools I use: spindle gouges, spindle roughing gouge, parting tool. And here's some of the sea urchins, and I got a couple of chucks that I'll use, one with regular jaws and one with small jaws. Here I'm just marking the center of all of the pieces for the top finial and the bottom finial. To start things out, I'm just going to use a small Sorby safe driver on one end, and then I've got a Cindy Drozda live center for the other end, which has a very small tip, great for these little finial type projects. So I'll start out by just roughing out the piece and putting a little tenon on the one end. Once I have the tenon on one end, now I can turn the piece around and put it in my chuck with the small jaws. And then I can establish a tenon on this other end that's exactly the size I need for my particular sea urchin. Every one is going to be different, so you can see here I measure it up, and then I'll do some trial and error to make sure it fits properly. When I have it close, I'll check with the actual sea urchin to make sure it fits properly. You'll notice I've made the tenon a little longer here so I can grab it with the chuck. And I just put a little bit of a taper on it so that it fits into the recess of the hole nicely. Here you can see that a little closer. Once this looks really good, I'm going to now drill a small hole. I think it's about an 1/8 inch hole for the little dowel that I use. And I like to use a dowel to connect the bottom finial and top finial because the sea urchin itself doesn't have a lot of structural strength. So now I can turn this around and form the actual finial. This is the approximate shape I'm going for. To do finials, I really like using this tool rest made by Stihl. It's kind of specifically made for doing finials, so you can wrap your fingers around it. To work on the finials, I use a combination of spindle roughing gouge, and then here I use a 1/2 inch spindle gouge. And then for the finer detail, I will use the 3/8 inch spindle gouge. Now there it is now. This is the 3/8 inch spindle gouge. I will turn as much as I can with having the tailstock support, and then when it's thin enough I remove the tailstock, and here we go. Oh yeah, this piece of finial had a little crack near the end of it and just broke off. That's happened to me maybe once or twice. So I've started again with a new piece, and this time I've checked for cracks and we should be good. And I'm not turning the thin part back nearly as far, so I'll have a little bit more support. And hopefully I won't run into the same problem. Here we go, let's try it. That's a little better. This is what is supposed to happen. Since this area is all done, I'm going to do the final sanding on it. To provide a little bit more support for the finial, I'm going to use these homemade steady rests. One is just made of wood, and this one is a Morse taper extension. Does the same thing. There's crisscross thread, and as you can see here, we're going to push that onto the very end of the finial, right in that grooved area. So now I can continue thinning down the finial with a little bit of tailstock support. I mean, this isn't a full support, but it reduces the vibration, gives a little bit of support when I'm turning the thin sections. And just like before, I've started with the spindle roughing gouge. Now I'm moving to the 1/2 inch gouge. And then for the thinner sections, I'll use the 3/8 inch spindle gouge. In this close-up view, you can see that I'm using my finger below the tool rest for extra support behind the finial. So when it gets really thin like this, this is a good way to provide a little bit of extra support. And now I've chose the rough area where I want to create a little bead. Now this is roughly in proportion to the sketch that I had, but you can kind of do it by eye as well. And just like before, as I finish a section, I'm going to sand it to its final finish. I'm probably going down to about 400 grit here. And just with a few more cuts, I've come down to my final shape. I like my finials to be black, so I'm going to use India ink here on this maple to turn it black. If I had my preference, I would use black wood, but it's a little bit harder to get and a lot more expensive. So this does the job, and it's perfect for something like a Christmas ornament. So I put the India ink on, and then I let it dry. Sometimes I heat it up with a little heat gun there to speed it up. And then I just use some Scotch-Brite to take off any rough surfaces. And I'm just going to pull this out of the chuck a little bit to be able to part it off, so we don't have as much wood inside of the sea urchin. And here we go. This is what it will look like. That matches up pretty nicely. Now we're going to move on to the top finial. So we're just starting with a larger piece of wood between centers again. And I'm going to round that down and create a tenon on this one side that fits into the chuck. And now I have to create a small tenon to fit my specific sea urchin. And so this will be just a little bit of trial and error. I go down with a parting tool until I get the correct diameter to fit in. And now this is fitting pretty good. So I'm going to create a small fillet or taper just down to that edge so it fits nicely into the hole in the sea urchin. So here you can see a better view of what that looks like. And again, I'm going to now drill that 1/8 inch hole for the dowel that's going to go right through the piece. After determining how high I want the top finial to be, I'm going to cut it off and then put it into the chuck and now work on the top of that finial. And next I'm going to mark the center and then drill a tiny little hole for a little eye hook for hanging the ornament. Here's a very small drill. Now I can just screw in the little eye hook by hand here. And here's what it looks like together. Rather than try to glue the finials to the shell somehow or other, you can see here that I'm just going to use the dowel to glue the two finials to each other with the shell trapped in between. That way I get better alignment of the top finial and bottom finial, and I don't put any pressure really on the shell itself. There it is. For a protective finish, I'm just going to use some semi-gloss spray lacquer. This makes a very unique and interesting looking Christmas gift and an ornament for someone's tree. Thanks for watching, and I have included a picture of the final piece at the very end.